And we're back for our latest episode of Boardroom RevOps, where we are bringing you valuable tips from RevOps experts so you can make it to the C-suite. Again, I'm James, co-founder of Accounting, next-gen BI solution for RevOps teams. I'm joined by Jessica Thomas today, who's SVP of Business Operations at FMX, but following a long stint in RevOps, and specifically the VP of RevOps. Great to have you on, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. I'm excited to be here.
Today we're going to dive into a topic that I've been hearing come up more and more lately from folks in the RevOps community, which is how the heck do I go from manager or director of RevOps to VP of RevOps? It's going to be a great conversation. But before we dive in, Jessica, do you want to share your background a little bit?
Sure. I have been doing this for a number of years now. But my background is kind of interesting. I think as with anybody who has like the twists and turns in the careers. My undergrad was actually in anthropology and archaeology, and I was convinced I was going to be Indiana Jones, as everybody is in that. Reality set in. I don't like spiders, that kind of thing. So I actually ended up in a career in higher ed and got my MBA while working in that. And I was managing a team that was implementing a CRM, so I was really, really involved in the setup of that and got to really, for the first time, see the back end of what those systems look like, and I just fell in love with it. And that really was kind of a pivotal point in my career, just shifting more from kind of an individual contributor, admissions, career counseling, that kind of thing in higher ed. I went on the back end and started managing a CRM across an entire university. From there, I moved in, out of higher ed and into a tech field, and I've been here for 13 years, just loving it.
Okay. I mean, if I really think about it, like going deep into a CRM is kind of like what I imagine the inspection part of archaeology is anyway, right? So maybe your degree went to good use.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of digging and a lot of finding and piecing things back together. So for sure.
Yeah. We'll jump into career growth here, but before we do, how do you define RevOps? Such a variable term.
Yeah, I love it because it's such a versatile word. I think it can be a noun, it can be a verb, depending on context, of course. But at its core, I like to define RevOps as really this systematic approach to alignment, strategy, and execution across a go-to-market org.
That's great. And so we'll dive into like career growth here now. I want to talk about the path upwards, but let's just start with like the what. So there's obviously a RevOps director where I think a lot of companies stop. I've seen so many RevOps directors at so many different types of companies. So what's the difference between a director and a VP when it comes to RevOps?
Yeah, from my experience, it's really a director is still very much focused on execution. And your day to day is probably spent doing triage, maybe some, IC work. You're managing people, but really you're kind of managing like processes, things like that. And the line for VP for me was really being able to take on more of a strategic role and get really involved in the planning and kind of figuring out like what are we doing next as a company and how are we going to get there. I took the execution skills from my time as a director, and I was able to marry those up then with kind of understanding strategy and saying, okay, now we've got to create the plan and make it so that it's executable. Because a lot of times, sometimes with strategy, it's like you have this really great idea, and it's like we're so far from being able to actually make that happen.
Yeah.
So a little bit of balancing kind of like reality versus kind of like what is a multi-year approach to something.
Yeah, is that how you define strategy? Because that is also a nebulous term, right? So is this getting it around the table with the rest of the executive team to think about what does everything need to look like 3 years out, or what does that kind of mean?
Yes, I think that's such a key part of a really great RevOps team is that, you're always going to have your firefighting things that happen, but thinking through kind of what is next, like what is the next direction that we need to be thinking about, kind of that proactive piece. So that like strategy to me is basically like proactive thought, like
Hmm.
what should we be doing next, in what priority order, what's in the way, like what's blocking, and does it make sense to do this one thing first? What are we needing to do it? So really, you have all that. Sometimes as a director, you're kind of given all that, or you're not really part of the decision making process. And so with kind of the transition to be VP and the strategy, I think you're more involved in kind of like here's why we're doing it and here's how it's going to happen.
Okay, makes sense. And I feel like RevOps is actually really well suited for that because they're so good at the how too. And so combining
Yes,
those two things, you can't actually have strategy without the tactics.
absolutely.
Okay, so we'll jump into like what do RevOps folks need to have from like a skill set, context set to make the jump. But I actually want to take like a slight detour on that strategy piece because it's also a really interesting question. How do you perform that? Figure out what comes next, be proactive. Like what's kind of your mental model for doing that well?
I mean, I I've been told that I will, like, you can literally see my gears turning in meetings when we start talking about something. I start building it in my mind and I start to think about kind of the interdependencies and like what is it going to take to get there. So that's where the execution side gets to. And then you've got to be able to articulate that and kind of say, how do we bridge the gap from like vision to actually making it happen? So
Got it.
that's a really huge part there. That I think that's a combination of hard and soft skills because you've got to combine those two things to be able to get to kind of that end in mind.
Yeah, tell me more about those hard and soft skills. So if we think about what a RevOps director has, what a RevOps VP has, how you have to prove yourself to make the jump, do you have a checklist of those skills? Like, are there any more that come to mind that folks should be thinking about?
Yes. So I think as a director, you're going to lean more into the hard skills, right? You're going to have that technical competency. When you're at maybe a smaller company with a less mature ops org, you're going to be closer to your tech stack. So, I'm a tried and true Salesforce believer. I love Marketo. I love all things, my tech stack. And I stay very close to those even in my role today, simply because I need to understand the function. Am I the only admin in those anymore? No, those days are long gone, thankfully. But the the data and analytics, the project management and prioritization skills, those are, I think, the things that get really well built up as a director, where you start to kind of, again, see that differences in the soft skills. A lot of times with elevating up into that like VP level, context shifting is going to be really important. I work on a dozen different projects at any given time. I'm involved in lots of different meetings, and even sometimes being willing to admit, hey guys, I need a minute. Can you like remind me where we are with this? Like
Hmm.
just being very aware of it. Empathy is a really big part of it when you're working with that go-to-market engine. There's a lot of moving parts, and sometimes I think it's easy to kind of remember that everybody has what can be a tough job at any given point in time. And while I'm thinking kind of like, how are we going to do this, I have to sit back and remember, like, I actually have to build something that works for the people who are going to do it. I'm not necessarily the executioner on this. I might be giving something to sales or to marketing, so really having that empathy, but grit. This job is challenging, as are most jobs, but RevOps is still kind of in that spot where sometimes you're just going to struggle with the overall concept, or people are going to kind of not necessarily understand why you're voicing an opinion the way you're voicing it. But the last part, I think, is probably the most important part, is you've got to develop your voice to have that strong and straightforward communication. And in order to do that, you have to effectively build relationships. In our roles, we end up being part of a lot of tough conversations, right? In the best of times, we're talking about things that are going really, really well, but the real benefit of RevOps is being able to find those pieces that are maybe not optimized and kind of figuring out like what truly needs to be done. And you've got to be able to really figure out how to convey what sometimes can be tough facts in the face of a lot of emotion. And so the relationship that you build with your cross-functional teams, being able to have those types of tough conversations is a very important soft skill once you reach that VP level.
That's such a good list, and we could probably spend 45 minutes unpacking each of them. I wish we had the time for that. So I'll then maybe ask more generally, and I want to touch on the last topic a little bit later, which I would lump in together with like authority. How do you build authority? So we'll save that for kind of once you're in the seat. But skill development, like that was a lot of different things. There was a long list of the soft skills as well. What's your advice for folks, like if they're trying to figure out how to develop these? Because so often RevOps is, there's not a lot of support there either.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, teams are small, there's always kind of the want to do more. I think it's, you've always kind of be open to new experiences. One of the things that I love most about my days, it's both the best and the worst thing. We were doing something in a team meeting the other day that was like, what fills your cup and what drains it? And I said, ironically, it's the same thing. It's the fact that, I might have a calendar of events on my day, but that does not mean that like that is what my day is going to look like. So, when I think about like building the skill set, it's get involved in the things that seem scary, because you can learn so much from failure or from when things go wrong. I would say the majority of my experience has probably been more when things go wrong and I know not to commit that same mistake again. And I can help guide us away from that path. I'd love to say that I've always done everything right. I don't think anybody can say that. But if you can learn from mistakes and not be afraid to make them, that's really where a lot of my skill set existed. When it came to the technology, I was just given keys to Salesforce. And I kind of said, well, if I break it, I got to fix it. And I was willing to take that risk. So I think a lot of it is just kind of having that gumption to just get up and go and know that you're going to learn by doing. I think most of us in RevOps have that experience.
And I think it's great advice. And I think, there are many scary situations, but I think knowing, and I'm curious if you agree with this, at least in my opinion, you know, making mistakes not the end of the world. Like I think most people know that those situations are really hard, and there's probably a greater tolerance for mistakes there than people actually realize. And so I think getting the benefit of that and understanding that can help make that jump sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've been lucky to be in environments where mistakes are not, you're not raked over the coals for them. And, so I never built that natural fear of like, oh my God, what if I do something wrong? I was lucky to kind of be supported by an organization that encouraged that kind of curiosity.
That's
And
great.
yeah.
And that's a good segue too, because I wanted to ask, like, the skills are one thing, and I think, figuring out how you can be proactive in your career to be put in situations where you can develop those skills is all great advice. Business situation and context matters as well for making it to VP, right? So, like, I don't think every company necessarily needs a VP of RevOps. I don't think every company understands it. Like, what do you think the right situation, context, maturity is to be successful in making this jump?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It really does depend on the org and kind of the, trajectory that you're on. Really, when you can kind of pivot into a VP role, it's because you're filling a gap that is there. And so the gap has to exist or you have to point that out. If a company is not ready for RevOps and that level of maturity, yet you find yourself in that position, it's going to be probably an uphill battle. And I've been in that, and you just kind of keep fighting. I think the best way to kind of combat that is like pre-position yourself in that role, depending on what your current role is. So a lot of it is like educating leadership about the value that RevOps can bring to an org. I feel like that's always kind of in the back of our minds of like, we want people to understand what we do. But half of it is talking about what you could be doing if you had the ability to be in the room, to have that seat at the table. So a lot of it is, the positioning, you got to ask for it. And you got to kind of explain to somebody the value that you can bring. So you got to be bold when it comes to it. But you also have to realize that there are going to be times when the business just isn't going to be ready for you. But in that same vein, you can do a lot in your role to get the business ready for you. So there's a lot of kind of like contextual shifting that you can do to help speed up the maturity to follow the path that you want to go into.
That's great. I'd love to double click into that on two questions. First, you made a great comment around not every company is ready for it or needs it. How can someone assess that? And then to your point, how can someone help shift the window so that they are ready for that?
I think the easiest way to spot is whether or not you feel like you're being fully used in your position, like fully maxed out. If you were kind of seen as like a triage or like a Salesforce admin, you've got some work to do to really kind of build up what RevOps is, right? Like that shift. We all saw that shift of like sales ops is now RevOps. Yes and no, right? Like there's more to it. Sales ops is a great place to start to get into RevOps, but those two things are not equal. So I think a lot of it is really like pre-positioning and kind of, again, taking on more. My current CEO has always told me, like do the job you want before you get the title, and then go ask for it. So it's really like, how can I start to get myself, and maybe it's, you can get a seat at the table occasionally, and you kind of get used to, you get other people used to you being there. That's a key to it as well, is kind of positioning yourself as, I can really add value to this conversation.
Yeah. Is there a tactical example that comes to mind for this? Like for me, and I'm curious if you'd agree with this one or if you have a better one, it's like, maybe I'm being seen as a Salesforce admin to your point. There's a conversation going on right now about some process change, which is going to have this downstream impact to some other process outside of what they're thinking. Like maybe I come to the table and say, guys, we got to think about the customer journey. Here it is as it stands. There's all these downstream impacts. It's going to have XYZ impact. Let's do this instead. Is that the right place to be proactive? Something like tactically like that, or is it something else?
Absolutely. I think the more that you can understand and relate like your processes to your customer journey, but it's a balance too, right? Like the customer journey should always be at the center of it, but then you also have to do the what's in it for me. Like when you're working with a sales team, they've got to have the context. There's a lot of times where I might be handed something, as a sales ops specialist, one of my first roles, or a marketing ops specialist, and I'm handed something and say, can you go do this? And I said, I can, but I don't think that's going to have the outcome that you think it's going to have.
Mm.
So sometimes what I can do is kind of take, a plan or find out about a plan and say, hey guys, and I'm a very blunt person. I don't know how many times I've told my VP of sales, and we're good friends, but hey, if you had included me, this probably would have gone a lot faster, or we could have gotten to this place a lot sooner, just by kind of, again, having like the contextual thing, because again, there's a lot of dependencies when it comes to systems, when it comes to process. The biggest tool that we have with RevOps is obviously like the data. At the end of the day, we also have to make sure that we are building a good foundation to collect the data that we need, and to be able to have actionable data. And, it's very easy to think about like a sales process simply from how many clicks do I have to do? I'm an SDR. How many clicks do I have to do to pick up a phone call? Yes, that's part of it, but like there's so much more to it. So just really not being afraid of kind of hitting that home and saying, we can do this, but we could also do this other thing that might actually be what you want.
Yeah, and that requires knowing their actual goal, right? And I think a lot of early stage practitioners are become taskmasters or order takers. It's like if you can take a step back, understand what you're trying to accomplish, have advice on how it might be best done. I think
Yeah,
that's really good
yeah.
advice from you.
Yeah, I think one of the most impactful things that I ever did was to come in and kind of create like a team charter that says, "Hey, let's start with the end in mind." Right? One of the most difficult things for us, I think, as operators is kind of to be handed like this fully fleshed out technical process from somebody who does not necessarily have the experience building it, and you're kind of sitting there looking at it and you're like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. Or, like that's going to be bumpy. I'm going to have to daisy chain a lot together. Again, reiterating, like, what are you actually trying to do
That's great.
it's really key. So in a charter, you can position yourselves as kind of like, hey, we're here to help you solve solutions if you tell us what the end in mind is, rather than try and give us a project that is, very well detailed and things like that. It's going to be better for everybody. And again, that's where like the relationship and that communication is going to be really key.
100%. I love it. I want to move shortly to being in the VPC and what that's like. But I have two quick final questions that we can maybe burn through. And I'm sure this one actually, in a perfect world, would not be quick. But you mentioned like positioning yourself over time to make the argument for that VP promotion. Any advice you have tactically on that front, like how folks could actually start to do that?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think you have to put yourself out there and you have to ask. You should not expect anyone else to offer what they might not know you want. And there might be, it might be uncomfortable to put yourself out there and say, hey, how do I become this? But you really won't know until you ask, right? Like we don't like to make ourselves vulnerable. We don't like to hear where we're lacking. But, like we do that every day when we look at processes and we try and find like efficiencies. Why would we not turn inward and kind of look at itself? So like the best thing you can do is really to start asking the question, hey, have you thought about what's next for me? Because I have thoughts and I want to run them by you, and let's figure out a plan together. I think the next thing you got to do is you got to bring proof, show your work, and really kind of trust yourself. RevOps typically has like this superpower of basically being able to see things through that different lens. And that's a major help to a company. And so really making sure that you are showing that as often as possible. A good friend of mine that I work with once said a phrase that stuck with me, which is, he's like, JT, you just report the news, you don't write it. And I was like, that's a really interesting and good like thing for me to remember, is that I have to know how to deliver good and bad news, but I have to recognize like I didn't do this, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's trusting yourself and knowing the value that you can bring. But again, it's put yourself out there and be in positions where, you're in front of leadership, you're in front of this, and then ask for help.
Great. I love it. That rounds it out, I think. Okay, let's talk about being in seat now. So you prepped management, you got them to see the light. You're now a VP of RevOps. What happens next? What's expected of you, other than kind of what we talked about? More strategic focus. What should incoming VPs be prepared for that maybe you weren't at the time that you made the jump?
I think you've got to have a really strong understanding of where your weaknesses are, and you have to be able to kind of shift those in. Again, you have to be able to juggle a lot of different things. And as a VP, you're never really going to be able to get away from the weeds, and that's okay. My biggest struggle was honestly starting to let go of some of those things that I had set up myself in a system and allowing my team to take it over, knowing, hey, I set up attribution 4 years ago. Is it still work? Probably, but is it as optimized as it needs to be? No, but I need to go trust my marketing ops manager to grow in her role and possibly tear the whole thing apart. And so letting
Hmm.
go for me was a big thing, and recognizing I need to give them enough guidance to still know what the end plan is, but letting go of things being set up my way was something that I think a lot of us struggle with. And it's just something that you don't expect to need to be prepared for, I guess. It's like one of those things that sneaks up on you. But you cannot know everything. Is when you transition to that VP role, you're doing a lot of stuff, you're very high level, and again, context switching is tough. So when you've built, when you've been lucky enough to build out a team, put your trust in your team and then let them be that subject matter expert. You're going to know a lot about a lot of things. They're going to know more than you, though.
Yeah, that is tough. I think I haven't made it to VP of RevOps myself, but even just jumping normal stage is tough to give up things that you've done. You mentioned you still have to be in the weeds. You also mentioned you have to give things up, though. Sounds like a
Mm-hmm.
pretty big balance. Like, how do you balance that? What is there a comfortable balance you've found? Any advice for folks on that?
Yeah, I talk to my team all day, every day. We use Slack to communicate, and we're all remote. We're all in different places, but we are a very connected team. And my biggest thing is I know my limits, and I don't want to break something that somebody else is going to have to fix. That is like my nightmare, my literal nightmare. So when I'm in the weeds, a lot of times I'm like, hey, I'm going to go build this out myself because it's a muscle I haven't worked on in a while, and I need a break, right? Like I need that mental shift to something that I won't call it mindless because it's definitely not, but it's different.
Hmm.
I will check myself with my RevOps manager and say, do we already have this, first of all? And are you okay if I go and try and build this? So I actually ask for permission to do certain things because I want to make sure that, again, what I've let go of, I'm not coming in like a bulldozer and a wrecking ball and breaking somebody else's stuff. But, again, I think it's recognizing that being an IC sometimes is like a palate cleanser. So you should do it. It's a good way to stay connected, but again, it's also like sometimes you just need that break.
Yeah, got to create something, right?
Yeah.
There's probably a million things going on at the VP level. A lot of context switching you've said a couple times now. Like, what's your approach to prioritization?
Yeah. My approach is basically to make sure that I have all my questions answered, or at least to the extent that they can be, right? Like sometimes we get a lot of thoughts and, hey, we want to do this. It's like, why are we doing it? And what is the expected outcome? Because if I think about something like a pricing shift, it seems straightforward. It seems easy. I know that there's a lot behind the scenes to do it. So like, how important is this? What do we expect the impact to be? Because I think it's our tendency, again, like we want to check things off a list. We want to feel like we accomplished things. It's very easy to go after those small things that don't have nearly as much return, but you can check it off and you can get it done. So it's recognizing like the balance of, hey, we really got to get this done because things are going to be so much better for us if we just grunt our way through it. But really it's tied to ROI. Like the biggest thing is what's going to get us to where we need to be as a company faster. There are things that are definitely going to be easier and more fun, but it's kind of like, like life, right? Like I don't want to clean my room as a kid, but I know that at some point I'm going to have to, and I might as well just get it over with because I also love to rearrange my furniture as a child, that kind of thing. Like you get something new in return.
That's great. And we talked about earlier coming back to like being authoritative. And so I think in the RevOps seat in particular, maybe this was your experience, maybe it wasn't. You have a lot of senior folks in the C-suite, VP of sales, head of marketing, kind of like telling you what to do, putting a lot of stuff on your plate. And hopefully by the time you made it to VP, you've already gotten good at managing those stakeholders. But now you're basically a peer. So tell me about like stepping into a more authoritative role, that transition. How do you build that muscle?
Yeah, I use the word partner a lot and I use it strategically to remind if I feel the need to remind somebody, hey, we are equal ground, we are partners. RevOps is always going to be a support role. It's an execution role, it's a support role, but if we can be strategic partners, we can get a lot more done that way. So really again, it's kind of, you don't shrink down and that you're going to be a supportive role, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't speak up when you see things and you have that opportunity. Again, it goes back to the relationship with departments. It's going to make or break your ability to be authoritative. As I said, I'm a pretty blunt person. I have been, all my life. And there are some times when, the situation might call for more tact and I might have to check myself. And I'm a big fan of kind of saying, I don't know how else to say this. and then say whatever I need to say. But it's like that, just by admitting that, it breaks down some of that like potential defensiveness that you can get, especially if you're delivering tough news. It's just like, hey, I don't know how else to say this. And it immediately disarms that other person. And then a lot of it is really, again, like asking ourselves why. So being authoritative. I think initially I was really worried about being seen as somebody who says no a lot. And then I kind of leaned into that. And I said, I shouldn't use the word no, because obviously you get like that negative connotation, but it's kind of like, what are we actually trying to do? And have we talked about whether or not we're all comfortable with the risks that might be involved? And really just, again, like, don't be afraid to slow it down. Sometimes we need to slow it down, right? Like we can work magic a lot of times on RevOps side. That doesn't mean we should.
Yeah. I'm loving this short lesson on human psychology too. It's so funny how a couple of these just choices of words can make the same output so much better. Clearly,
Yes.
you've been in a few of these experiences to learn
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's great. Last topic here, and we're almost at time. Just building a team. So you've mentioned your team. It's very clear just from this conversation that you think very highly of them, which is great. It would be a sad reality if you didn't. Like, we can take this a few different ways. Maybe we'll come back to like how you kind of build the team and choose who to hire. But like maybe let's just start with like making the case to grow the team, because I've heard many times, and it's actually a pet peeve of mine, like RevOps is not revenue generating, and so we're going to go do something else with the money, which I do not believe. But tell me about how you make the case to grow the team.
Yeah, that is always a tough thing to hear, I think, is, so I will say first and foremost, being friends with your CFO helps. Figuring out how to position that ask in terms of the results. It's very easy to hear, we have growth goals. We're going to go hire a bunch more salespeople. Sometimes I'm the one who's kind of like, I need to raise my hand and just ask, do we have the enablement necessary? Do we have the ramping? Are we stellar? Because as an alternative, I could hire an ops person and I can increase the efficiency of existing sellers.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's really making sure that you give people the options of saying you can always throw more bodies on the sales team, right? Like, that's always kind of, I think, a gut reaction. And it's like, but are we like, let's take a look at our take rates and our
Pipeline coverage. Do we have the pipeline? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Our quota coverage, our, quota attainment, quota participation, is that as high as it needs to be?
Hmm.
Because if it's not, there's probably something that we can do from the ops side to help the existing team, which may make that dent a lot smaller. So really it's positioning us as an alternative. Now that doesn't always work. You have to be willing to be told no on that. I also think, if you build it, they will come, to quote, that amazing baseball movie Field of Dreams. Like if you start building a really great RevOps organization, you will find natural growth options, like natural growth potential with people, because you're like, if you start to impress people with what you're building, it's like, oh, what more could you do?
Yeah.
Again, setting yourself up to be able to make a very easy case to say, hey, for the simple price of a marketing ops rep, or marketing ops specialist, I can do this. I also relate it to what's going on in the business. We have to grow the same way that other teams grow.
Hmm.
If marketing doubled their headcount, doubled their marketing spend, and I own marketing ops, guess what? My person's job just got twice as hard. So I need to go say, I might need a resource. Maybe it's an intern, right? Like think outside the box too with that.
Yeah. All really good advice. Be friends with the CFO.
Yes.
Tie it to impact. I'm joking, but maybe throw cold water on the existing sales headcount
Yeah.
goals and scaling with the organization. I think that's great. Okay, my last question for this whole discussion until our quick rapid fire finish is just around choosing who to hire.
Hmm.
How do you hire? It's a big question. I'll let you take it any way you want to go.
Yeah. I think you got to truly understand, like, what are you hiring for? I think it's very easy to kind of take a look at any article that says, like, here's what an ops team should look like.
Hmm.
Every team needs to look different based on what your business needs. So you really have to make sure that you're thinking about like what your organization needs. If you've got a huge tech stack, you need someone to help cover that, right? So you need somebody who leans more into the technical stuff. But if you know that you have issues with data or that you have issues with processes, you need to find somebody who has that skill set. So you really, again, it's kind of uncovering like what is the true source of our pain and what's the best possible solution to bring it in. I also love hiring people who've kind of done it before.
Hmm.
So on my team, I have a former marketer, I have a former SDR, and I have a former AE who have all kind of done it before, know what it's like to live because they can more easily like translate. To be honest, it builds a bridge with the teams that
Have the
listen.
empathy. Yeah.
Absolutely. They remember what it was like to be an SDR and to make, so many dials a day and all this. And they can think about that as they're building out the processes.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Jessica, this is amazing. I feel much more edified about what it takes to become and be a VP of RevOps. I think everyone else will too. Two quick rapid fire finishes for you. First thing that comes to mind. First one, if you could fix one challenge in RevOps, you snap your fingers, it goes away. What would it be?
Yeah, I think that there's this like air of mystery, and it's hard to define what RevOps is. It really doesn't have to be that hard. The beauty of RevOps as a function is that you can literally build it to suit your needs, and it can scale with the company. I think it's like don't put a box around it.
Great.
It can be
And how would you describe a great RevOps leader in 3 words?
strategic, collaborative, and relentless.
Perfect. Jessica, thanks so much. I really appreciate you joining us. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, James. This was fun.